Welcome to the Easier Way to Sell presentation of Close the Deal Without Selling. Here's your host and developer of the Easier Way to Sell, Ike Krieger.
Hey, this is Ike Krieger. Welcome back. Among the segments of this episode is a pretty heavy suggestion that you avoid saying, "I'm sorry," under certain circumstances, and that in almost any circumstances, you avoid justifying yourself. I'll let you know why in a little while. We're also going to be covering something that we touched upon in an earlier episode, that's adult learning, and I have some thoughts on the business networking platform called LinkedIn. Since I came out of retirement, I'm spending an awful lot of time on LinkedIn, and I'm finding it very different from 2010. So I will share with you a little bit later my thoughts about what I've been seeing and hearing on LinkedIn. Let's get to it. Here's something I'd like you to avoid. I'm pretty sure that when you're unavailable to speak on the phone, you use your telephone answering system to leave an inbound message for those who call. This message is of great importance to you, your business, and your brand strategy, and it may seem inconsequential, and yet the message you send creates a first impression that can either strengthen your future relationships or weaken them. Certain words and certain statements tend to cause humans to think and respond in certain ways. And as a reminder, here's an example of what that would be. Don't think of a pink elephant. Or don't look down. Another form of powerful communication is known as an anchor. Here's an example of an anchor. By the way, this is the first time I've ever tried this not in person. And I believe it will work now, even though we're not face-to-face. First, I want you to take a second and find a pen or something else that's small and conveniently within reach. Put the object in your hand and just take a look at it. Now, what I'd like you to do is think back to an experience or something else that really made you smile or laugh. This could be a comedy routine, the first time you saw your new baby, or anything else that was said by a family member or a coworker. Anything that'll make you smile. Now, after you think of it, and after you start smiling, take your pen or the other object you've chosen and jiggle it in front of your eyes. Remember to maintain the thought of whatever made you smile. When this experiment works, you'll find that from now on, every time you look at that object, you'll find yourself with a smile on your face. You've been anchored to the emotion of happiness by that object. Try this experiment on a friend or a family member, and about an hour later, jiggle the object in front of their eyes and watch a smile appear on their face. I used to perform this anchor exercise on members of my class. And for the next few sessions, I'd pull out the pen I anchored them to and jiggle it in front of their face, and they would smile, and they would say, "Okay, stop doing that." They said that because they couldn't help smiling every time I showed them the pen. That's a positive anchor. Here's an example of a negative anchor. Someone you know experiences a death in the family. You attend the funeral, and when you see your acquaintance, you walk over and tell them how sorry you are as you touch them on their shoulder. You've anchored them to a sad experience with that tactile gesture. If in the future you meet with that person and touch them on that same place on their shoulder, their emotion will briefly revisit the sadness they felt after the loss of a loved one. And they won't know why. The sadness emotion will just re-enter their internal world. Now you know what not to do as a mourner at a funeral. Human emotional memory is a strange bird. Now, let's get back to your phone answering device. Here's what I want you to avoid. Avoid saying, "I'm sorry we're not available." I'm sorry is an anchor for having done something incorrectly or unwanted. If you really want to get technical about it, the reason you're receiving the call is because the person on the other end of the line may have an issue, and they need to solve that problem. Actually, should you not be available, they should be sorry that you're not there. Change your message. It can still be simple and brief, but lose the "I'm sorry." Something like this might work. Hello, this is Ike Krieger. You've reached the offices of the Easier Way to Sell. We're unavailable at the moment, and you know the rest of the drill. So, here's the coaching. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but lose the sorry. Actually, I'm not sorry to say that at all. In previous episodes, we've discussed the different communication modes of humans. I'm talking about the modes that reflect an individual's preferred channel for receiving and processing information most effectively. Are they an auditory, a visual, or a kinesthetic? As some of you are aware, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool auditory. If you want to communicate most effectively with me, tell me something rather than show me. I prefer to learn by hearing rather than reading. I'm such an auditory that I am still only one of 2,000 registered craftsman piano technicians left in the United States. You can't find a much more auditory human than a piano tuner. I retired some years back, but I've maintained my certification. When I was serving my apprenticeship in the mid-1970s, the ability to tune a piano perfectly came to me more slowly than my personality was prepared to accept. When you tune a piano for a concert or in a recording studio, almost perfect doesn't cut it. I was frustrated at not being as good of a tuner as I wanted to be as soon as I wanted to be. My sensei, my mentor, the man under whom I was serving my apprenticeship, was named Bob Perkins. He founded and ran the Perkins School of Piano Tuning and Technology on the far west side of Cleveland, Ohio. I asked Bob when would I have complete confidence that my tunings would be perfect. He replied, "You have to tune 100 pianos." For those of you to be effective users of the Easier Way to Sell, you have to tune 100 pianos. I know, a mixed metaphor. However, remember the quote by Aristotle. For those things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. So, learn the system and use it, and after a while you'll have it down pat. But there's another issue, and we talked about the problems that adults face when learning something new. The challenge is adults rarely, if ever, learn something new after the completion of their formal education. What have you learned to do since you became an adult? Have you learned a new language? Have you learned how to play guitar? Have you learned how to repair a car? You see what I mean? I've talked to you over and over about the effect of habits on your communication skills, and your communication skills are so ingrained into your unconscious that learning a new skill plays havoc with your unconscious competence. I invite you to review all the episodes that contain the open-ended questions that I suggest you use and make sure to memorize them. Or these same open-ended questions and more are available in your Close the Deal Without Selling action guide. But memorization by itself is a different process than the learning of a new skill or a new habit. However, your knowledge of these open-ended questions will give you an option you've never had before. Open-ended questions as a first response give you the ability and the freedom to stop giving away valuable information or information that might throw a wrench into the remaining conversation. Whether you employ open-ended questions in the use of this system or in the use of any other sales approach, I promise you that open-ended questions will make a big difference in your selling effectiveness. I promise that open-ended questions will make a big difference in whatever you're doing. But back to learning. Who are you as a learner? Are you a someday, maybe I hope learner? Or are you in a be, do, have mindset in which you tell yourself that a person like you learns things so you can have what you say you want? Are you keen on learning a new skill because it will move you from your present state to your desired state? Or are you putting your toe in the water, hoping your experience is comfortable? Remember, if learning a new skill was comfortable and easy, everyone would do it. I've heard it said that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. You've got to want to learn so who you are has more tools for the future you invented. You can learn this system, but you got to want to. Go do it. If you're a first-time listener to the Close the Deal Without Selling podcast, you may be wondering whether or not this easier way to sell is for you. If you go back about 25 episodes, I shared the easier way to sell guidelines, which will help you in your decision. And I'm going to share it again now. These guidelines will give you a feel if this is something that fits into who you are as a salesperson. First, seek the truth. Just because you believe something is true, that doesn't make it true. It just makes it true for you. Number 2, we're all in sales. Nobody likes to be sold to, but you have to sell to live. Shift your truth about selling and self-promotion. Number 3 is talk less and sell more. Give up the notion that to inform is to sell. Get information. Don't give it. Interview rather than present. 4th is think like a doctor. Examine and diagnose before you prescribe, and remain curious, authentic, and neutral. Number 5, be a problem solver. What is a problem? What is business? What is closing? And for the purposes of this system, a problem is when there's a difference between what you have and what you want. Business is the ability to solve other people's problems and get compensated for it. And closing is your ability to have a conversation with someone in which they come to a conclusion on their own that what you're offering will solve their problem. Number 6, know what problem you solve. People don't care about what you do. All they care about is what you can do for them. People want you to help them get what they want. 7 is be a trusted guide. If prospects knew how to get to their destination on their own, they would. Be a navigator. 8, be an expert questioner. The person asking the questions is the one that controls the communication. The one doing the talking usually dominates. People like to talk, so help them talk. Ask open-ended questions. Number 9, be an expert listener. Listen with an intent to understand rather than an intent to reply, and learn to shut down your response mechanism. Number 10, establish rules for the communication. Establish mutually beneficial agreements. Avoid, but I thought you meant. 11 is uncover a no that was going to happen anyway. Sometimes no means no. Stop spending so much time trying to turn a real no into a yes. 12 is give up the need to sell. Heighten your commitment to sell. Eliminate the need to sell. 13, know your outcome. If you don't know where you're going, that's where you'll end up. If you don't know what you want, how will you know when you've got it? 14, maintain your outcome. Maintain your outcome, not your position. Proving you're right is unproductive. Invent the future. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. Plan from the future backwards. Number 16 is be intentional. Do you want what you want, or do you just want to want it? 17 is meet people at their model of the universe. People like people who are like themselves. People buy from and respond to people they like and trust. 18. Be interested rather than interesting. Shut down your response mechanism. Listen and ask questions. 19. Avoid problem clients. Trust your intuition. You've got enough problems with your non-problem clients. To take on a client that you know is going to be a problem is insanity. Number 20, follow a system. Most salespeople wing it. Use the easier way to sell. Achieve what you want more easily and more often. Well, I think those are 20 good tips. Now, if you want to find out how to do all of those, I invite you to go back and start listening from episode 1 and meet me back here. I'm going to take a moment. I must take a moment to remind you that the name of this podcast is not The Easier Way to Prospect, or the easier way to set an appointment, or the easier way to farm your territory, or the easier way to get referrals. It is all about the easier way to sell. So those of you who are sending letters asking me, but what about prospecting? But what about setting appointments? This podcast is about sales. This podcast is about communication. But I'll tell you what, I'll go find some guests to have a conversation with here on the podcast that might be able to give you some insights as to being more effective at any one of those activities. The easier way to sell will help you set appointments. The easier way to sell will help you in prospecting. The language and communication skills that are part of the easier way to sell process are those used by an effective communicator. Once you have the easier way to sell under your belt, your communications ability will grow as well. So, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for taking the time to send your questions regarding the application of the easier way to sell to other columns in the sales cycle. I'm pretty sure I could share some insights and my opinions as to the best way to go about all those other sales activities, but my areas of proficiency are sales and communication. Good prospecting. Hear ye, hear ye. If you want to make a more powerful impression on the people in your business life and in your personal life, here's a tip. Avoid justifying yourself. Avoid justifying yourself about anything. It's a losing cause. When you justify yourself, you lose your magnificence. What a strange thing to say. How does one lose their magnificence? Well, think about the last conversation you had with a child or a coworker who was put in the position of explaining to you why and how the action they took was really a product of their best intentions, or that they didn't mean to have it turn out that way. What's your initial reaction when you hear someone justify their activities? This is far different than an apology. We're talking about a justification. A justification produces the opposite response that one might think. When you have a chance to justify yourself, don't. Remember, when you justify yourself, you lose your magnificence. I haven't steered you wrong yet. Well, I've been working on the Close the Deal Without Selling podcast for nearly a year now, and here are some observations I've made during that time. The world of sales training seems no farther along in its evolution than when I left the business in 2011. Prior to creating this podcast, I was mostly a retired guy doing my thing on social networks that were geared towards the personal and the political. In 2018, I had a stroke. Happy 70th birthday. I recovered in about 6 months, and I realized that had I gone on to meet my maker, the 30 years of training materials I'd created would have been lost. So I made the decision to unbox everything and archive all of the training on a podcast and share it with you for free. It's been a delightful project, and I've been having a blast reviewing all the material. Plus, in order for me to let you know about the podcast, I somewhat unretired and ventured back into the realm of business and LinkedIn. And by the way, if you're not following us on LinkedIn, please go to Close the Deal Without Selling and follow that page, or connect with me personally at Ike Krieger. Now, here are a few of those observations I've made since my return. First, LinkedIn has grown up a lot. But pretty much everyone who participates on LinkedIn remains consistent. You all have a common outcome that revolves around the goal of success. I've had the privilege of connecting with a whole new generation of salespeople. Developing these new relationships has been most enjoyable and educational. And surprise, surprise, those who I've connected with have the same desire to be successful as you do. I'm once again immersed in the conversation about sales and marketing, and I'm really enjoying the back and forth, and the little bit of mentoring I've been doing seems to be received positively. However, what I've been really blown away by are sales-related posts from business owners, entrepreneurs, executives, sales trainers, and sales consultants, either requesting or sharing selling advice. I've seen that the state of business and sales communication in the world seems no farther along than it was in 2010, and in some cases, it's gone backwards. It was my vision that by now sales would be, how can I say this, less traditional. But nearly every bit of advice I read on LinkedIn seems to focus on the old-fashioned way of selling. The conversations range from commentaries about the hell of cold calling, the stress of objections, the challenges of giving a presentation that sells, the best way to respond to a no, the best way to handle uncooperative prospects. Most of the solutions I'm reading appear to come straight out of the sales manual used by characters in Death of a Salesman or Glengarry Glen Ross. Neither of those stories painted the salesman's lot as a happy one. I'll keep offering my alternatives to the old-fashioned way to sell. However, I understand that the old-fashioned way to sell works. You just have to work too hard to make it work, and the results of the traditional show-and-tell selling approach are random and inconsistent. A new generation of salespeople would welcome an easier way to sell. In my system for selling without selling, stress-filled sales techniques like the best way to handle a no or the best way to handle objections disappear. Those nagging issues are just not part of the easier way to sell. So, I'd just like to put it out there that I really appreciate the time and effort that those of you who are offering your time and advice are putting out there to help others. I just want to suggest that there's a different way, an easier way to approach those issues. I know an easier way to sell might not seem probable or attainable, but the easier way to sell really works. I invite you to explore a different way to sell. I invite you to learn the easier way to sell. Well, I really liked that episode. I want to remind you of your opportunity to contact me with any questions or thoughts about your use of the easier way to sell. Where are you getting bogged down? What are your successes? And I would love to share those successes with your fellow listeners, so contact us at closethedealwithoutselling@gmail.com. Tell your friends and colleagues about the Close the Deal Without Selling podcast. They'll be glad you did. This is Ike Krieger. See you next time.